Today, I'm going to call it day 9 of training camp because we did have that red-blue practice in there the other day. And it's August 6, 2023. Felt like the crowd was a little bit late arriving today, but we did end up getting a nice crowd out there to watch practice. On the offensive side of the ball, they tried to get the ball to James Cook more today, and some lined up as a wide receiver, involved in the passing game more. And good to see that. I like to see Cook involved in the passing game. I saw a couple of nice catches by Shakir out there, and always good to see him involved. I'd like to see him more involved in our passing game. And Diggs had some nice catches. I think the offensive player of the day probably goes to Davis. He did have a drop early on, but he had several really nice catches during practice. Dawson Knox also had a long catch, which he gave a little stiff arm to Kaiir Elam, and Elam sort of rode him to the end zone for a touchdown. But that was an interesting thing that happened on the offensive side of the ball. Now, moving over to the defensive side of the ball, before practice, I told Coach Washington that the defensive line is playing so well, it might start to hurt the egos of our offensive linemen, as they're going to question their abilities. But he liked that. So, you know, he's the defensive coach. So he probably likes to hear that his guys are doing well. And they really are. He knows it, but probably always nice to hear someone say something anyway. And Coach Washington was really nice. And on the defensive side of the ball today, the big plays, Siran Neal had a really good practice. And he had one that he knocked down a pass, and then he perfectly timed a blitz and got in there and sacked the quarterback. I told him about that afterwards, that I thought he really did good on that blitz, and he said thank you. And on the defensive side of the ball, but the player of the day probably was Christian Benford. Christian Benford had not one, but 2 interceptions today. One, I mean, right place, wrong time on the passer's part, because Christian was right there, and I'm not sure who the ball was supposed to be going to, but Benford caught it. And then he had really, really good coverage on another wide receiver during practice and went away with the football. So Christian Benford had a fantastic day today. If you can come away with 2 interceptions in one practice, you're doing really well. So I would name the player of the day overall is Christian Benford. As far as autographs, well, first of all, before practice, I was able to talk to David Questenberry and told him about the cancers that I've been going through or have been through. You know, and I've had, for those of you that don't know, 3 forms of cancer. When I was younger, I had Hodgkin's lymphoma. And then I had some skin cancer removed from my head. And then I had a bout with colon cancer where they had to remove over a foot of my colon. So I have had 3 bouts of cancer. So Questenberry asked me if I was doing all right now. And I said, yes. And, you know, I'm doing much better now. Thanks for asking. But yeah, it was nice to talk to him about that because, you know, David had his bout with Hodgkin's as well. And came out the other side to have an NFL football career, which is very, very impressive. Because I know they've done some better things to fight cancer since I had it when I was 17, but very impressive to be able to play football after that experience of chemotherapy and radiation and whatever he had to go through. So I do like David Questenberry a lot. I don't have his autograph yet, but that's a whole nother story. Afterwards, as I said, Siran Neal stayed out to sign autographs. Trey White stayed out to sign autographs. And I did see David Courage. I'm not sure how to say his name. And Tommy Doyle. Tommy Doyle they were all over with us to sign autographs. I'm not sure who was other places for the general admission folks, because the VIPs, I'm sure they had the Josh Allens and the Diggs and the Kincaids and all the big name players over there. But we're happy that anyone comes over to see us in the general admission. Love our Buffalo Bills and love them coming over there. And speaking of autographs, I was able to only get one new one today because I'm getting short on photos. My printer has died, so photos are going to become limited here. As you see over my shoulder, I already had a Greg Rousseau autographed, and that one's got Groot in it. A little picture of Groot is part of it, but this is one right when he was signed. Greg Rousseau signed this for me today when he was drafted by the Bills. He put that out to show his wingspan, which that's pretty incredible. And he came over before practice, actually, and signed this for me. Asked me where I was from, so I told him Rochester. My wife told him we were from Texas, but we've been living here for 2.5 years now, or over almost 3 years. So at some point, we'll have to call Rochester our home. But do miss Texas. Loved it in Midland, Texas. But Greg signed that for us, and I told him I can feel it in my bones that he is going to have a fantastic season this year. And Greg thanked me for the support. A lot of players after practice were walking around with no shoes on. I found that pretty interesting. Dean Marlowe, Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde, Trey Day, Saran, all with no shoes. I don't know what that was about, but I never noticed that before. But little interesting thing. So now we have a couple of days with no practice. I'm not sure if they're just practices, they're going to hold practices and they're closed to the public, or if they were open, or if they're just not having practices at all. But then we'll be back on August 9th and August 10th to finish out training camp with the Buffalo Bills. And the biggest thing that happened in practice today was towards the end of practice. We did have our first injury, real injury of practice. There's been soreness and guys have sat out one day or another for problems. But there was a pass up the middle, deep up the middle, and Cam Lewis and a wide receiver, I'm not sure who it was, collided really hard. And Cam came down on the field really hard and stayed down there for a while. He eventually did get up and walk off on his own power, and they took him right into the tent. Hopefully he is okay. Love Cam Lewis. And he's right there. And, we never want to see anybody get injured on any team, really. Oh, another player I wanted to mention that really had a good day. Marcel Aitman. I think that's how you say his name. I'm not completely sure on that one. But Marcel, he had several catches today, number 15. So he stuck out a little bit as a guy that you don't often see making great catches during practice. So hopefully that was a big step forward for him today. But the most important thing to always remember is that God loves you. And so do